Welcome to another episode of the Talent Lab. We are flying solo again. Brad is giving me the space to continue the series of episodes of elevating voices for women in biotech and really learning from their expertise and honestly asking them to teach me things I don't fully understand purely for my own benefit. So, despite the slightly selfish reasons for this podcast, I hope that it's going to be useful for everybody else too. And so, today's guest on the Talent Lab is Dr. Laura Berenger. She is a toxicologist and principal biocompatibility scientist. She works, as I understand it, at the intersection of biology, chemistry, material science, helping ensure that medical devices are not just innovative, but really safe for patients before they reach the market. Her work spans everything from biological risk assessments to regulatory submissions, and she's been directly involved in guiding products throughout the FDA pathway. And products such as really just a range of device types, from what I understand, from respiratory systems to implants to blood clotting devices. So she truly understands how complex those safety evaluations can get. And on top of all of that, outside of the professional world, Laura is a mom of two boys, which I think qualifies her as its own full-time leadership role. So she's very much wearing multiple hats. And we love to showcase those types of personalities on this podcast. So, Laura, without much further ado, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Marina. I feel really honored that you asked me to be on your podcast, and I'm really excited to talk to you about being a woman in biotech.
I think it's definitely one of those things that I absolutely love talking about. And I always like to start maybe a little bit earlier than the job title, because when people hear something like toxicology, biocompatibility scientist, it sounds very technical, but no one starts off thinking, oh, this is exactly what I want to do when I grow up. Full disclosure, I've done a little bit of research and I read a wonderful article about you from a while back, and we can share a link to that as well. When you talked about growing up around healthcare, both of your parents were in the space, right? Your dad worked in rare genetic diseases. So, is this what kind of drew you to science to begin with? And at what point did it shift from I enjoy science to I want to work with something that directly impacts humans?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Marina. So I think that having a scientifically literate family growing up was a huge catalyst for me being able to be exposed to so many different fields of science. So my dad
Mhm.
is a microbiologist and then started working at pharmaceutical companies and then ultimately ended up in the rare genetic disease space. My mom was a nurse. And so I was exposed to a lot of healthcare terminology and science at an early age. I
Uh-huh.
think that probably in grade school, when I started to learn about the body, when I started to have some of those like health sections about what does your heart do? What does your lungs do?
Mhm.
That really, I was really drawn to that. My parents really fostered a sense of learning and discovery in me at an early age. So they would take me to all of the local museums. We lived in New Jersey and are very close to Philadelphia. So between Philadelphia, DC, and New Jersey, I got to go to all the really cool museums, Smithsonian, the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorites. So I think mostly it was just being in an environment where my parents wanted me to do and learn and see as much as possible. And I just gravitated towards science and health.
Yeah. I really love that about your background, that even from the very early age, your parents kind of instilled this thought that it's not science for the sake of science, but it's very much science like in service of people, that there
Yes.
is that final impact somewhere. So, right now, you're operating at a level where, again, you're not just doing science, you're really designing evaluation strategies, right? So, working with regulators, helping determine whether a device can actually move forward. And from that perspective, was there like a moment that you realized that level of responsibilities, that the path I want to take, I want to have that responsibility? Like, how did that click or transition for you?
That's also a really great question. I think that I started to get glimpses of how it potentially could be even in my graduate work. I had a really amazing PhD advisor. Her name is Dr. Caroline Schauer. She's still at Drexel University, and she supported all of the growth that I wanted to embody. She was a mom. She had two young boys. She was married, and she was the principal investigator of her own lab. And I think that working with her and seeing the types of experiments, the types of things that I could help design and create with the ultimate goal of knowing that I wanted something to end up at a patient, right? Because at the end
Mhm.
of the day, all of this work is to ensure that there is a safe product on the market for patients. So I think even in graduate school, I kind of developed this mentality that, ooh, the work that I'm doing, the experiments that I'm doing, these are going to be really important. And kind of knowing at the outset that there was going to be a lot of responsibility so that each time I took a new position in my career, I
Mhm.
knew their expectation eventually was that I was going to have to be making decisions that could absolutely truly affect patient safety on the market.
That is really impressive. I don't know if I would want more responsibility in my life than I already have, but it's really, I really commend you in that because obviously lots of time people don't really think of that impact, but not even designing something or innovating something, but making sure that a product that maybe was designed by somebody else or a device that was designed by somebody else still meets some rigorous standards that were put in place for the right reason. So, but let's start kind of with the most basic question, biocompatibility. In your mind, in plain English, kind of give me an idea of what we're actually talking about when we're talking about biocompatibility.
Yeah, that's a great question and one that I often get. And I think on its most basal terms, biocompatibility has to do with if you are introducing a new material or a new
Mhm.
substance into the body, is the body going to be okay with it?
Okay,
What
so
is
like if
the
mhm.
effect?
So if this product touches anything like human body, if it can irritate it, damage it, like poison, inflame it, right? That's something that we absolutely need to know. Any unintended harm that it can cause, right? Is that how we're
Absolutely.
thinking about it? Okay.
Absolutely. I would say the tenet here of biocompatibility is not some definitely the effects of the material, but you're wanting to make sure that the material, the device, the substance isn't adversely affecting the
Okay.
body as well. So not just having it be suitable, but ensuring that there's no downstream effects that could potentially be problematic. I think that's a core of biocompatibility that
Mhm.
sometimes doesn't always get mentioned at the forefront, and then it creates issues downstream.
So it's like, what could go wrong and how certain are we about it, right? Okay, so you're basically the equivalent of like my mom worrying about all the potential pitfalls. And no matter how seemingly benign or unlikely they are, right? You're like, you're a helicopter parenting on behalf of all of us when it comes to putting like a device through, right? Like that's basically what we're talking about.
Absolutely, that's a great
Yes.
analogy. I will
Mhm.
say I use the mom skills that I have with my boys and the peripheral worrying that I do absolutely apply to the job that I do right now, to ensure that devices go through stringent processes to ensure that they're safe and thinking about, like you said, everything that could go wrong.
So for a layman like me, kind of walk me step by step. What does safety evaluation process look like? Like, what's the first question you ask? Does it matter whether it touches the skin or the tissue inside? How do materials factor into it versus what kind of data do you look at first? Like, what very brief overview of your thought process when it comes to like, hey, here's me, I'm an inventor, I designed this. What does Laura ask step by step?
Yeah. So the first thing I ask is, what is your device intending to do? What kind of, where are you interfacing? Is it a
Mhm.
skin? Are you interfacing on the skin? Are you implanting it into somebody? Does it make respiratory tract exposure? How long is the device going to be used for? Is it something where it's a wound closure device where potentially it's sutures, and so they're going to dissolve in maybe 5 to 10 days, or
Oh,
you'll have to get them taken out? Or is
okay.
it something that's more long term, like a ventilator that could potentially be needed for life? Those are the first two things that I ask is patient contact category and patient contact duration.
So basically, you have worked from even designing the evaluation plan itself to directing like the testing to then supporting regulatory submissions. Is there a point where you should come in maybe even before the device is completely done? Is it more of getting you involved and somebody with your expertise involved when it's still somewhat theoretical, like maybe in the middle of the development process? Where do you think is the most viable point for you to come in and really offer your expertise?
That's a great question. So, in an ideal situation, it's always good to have somebody like me come in as soon as possible because we
Mhm.
can help select materials that are appropriate. And the material selection is a huge part of biocompatibility because if you design for the biocompatibility up front, then it makes a lot of the regulatory testing that's needed downstream go a lot smoother because you've chosen
Mhm.
materials that are going to be what we call compliant and biocompatible out of the gate. So something like a USP class medical grade polymer is always going to give a better performance compared to something that is potentially automotive grade or a generic grade that isn't highly controlled. So if you get us involved sooner, then we can help you choose the materials for your application so that downstream, your biological endpoint testing, your tox risk assessments,
That's right.
everything that goes into the biocompatibility package it looks good.
It makes sense. So basically, you're there to even potentially prevent situations such as when the data is really not saying what the company was hoping it would, right? Something in a lot of ways, you're not even evaluating safety. You're just the person who can slow down or even stop something from reaching the patient. But the earlier you troubleshoot it, the easier is going to be the process in the end. Am I understanding it correctly?
That's absolutely correct. So the saying I think is an ounce of a prevention is worth a pound of cure, or something to that effect. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to, in the very beginning stages of knowing, okay, we're going to make this medical device, it's going to interface with the blood, let's say, it's going to
Okay.
be circulating blood. We want to make sure that we have a hemocompatible material that isn't going to interact with the blood and create something like a hemolysis effect that isn't going to leach out and then be able to be systemically distributed through the body because of the type of contact that circulating blood would make. Um, Being able to upfront have somebody like me come in and talk to you about material selection, cross linkers, UV stabilizers, processing agents, mold releases, things that all are part of manufacturing of the device. As if you can get ahead of that in the beginning and choose
Mhm.
correct materials, the downstream effects of having a successful biological and toxicological risk assessment are very high.
I mean, that makes sense. I love this because it obviously shows that really just thinking of product safety or drug safety, device safety, it's not just one checkbox, but it's like a chain of decisions that need to be made almost at every step of the process. And really thinking about those things is not just generating data, it's really interpreting what does this mean for us downstream, right? What does this mean for us as far as patient impact? And really what does it mean in the real world, right? An overall process of safety and evaluation. Okay, thank you for helping me articulate it even in my own head. I guess it kind of brings me to something that I know you and I are both passionate about. I want to touch on something that maybe, I don't know, is not an instant leap, but for a long time when people talk about safety testing, a lot of times they meant animal testing, right? So it almost assumed to be part of the process. But science is evolving. Technology is evolving. We're digitizing a lot of things, whether it's organ on a chip or digitizing a wet lab, even in the preclinical stages. But so, where does animal testing show up today? Where do you think it no longer needs to be? Kind of give me your thoughts on how far we've come. What are we seeing? Maybe some trends as it relates to what you and I are talking about.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it can be potentially polarizing when you talk
Hmm.
about safety testing because people automatically assume, oh, they're just killing animals senselessly to see if, this drug or this device is acceptable. And what I would say is that first of all, we've made a lot of advancements in what we would call NAMs, new alternative methods.
Hmm.
So things like in vitro cell cultures, like you mentioned, kind of like organ or lab on a chip, things where we can start to mimic certain physiological systems inside the
Mhm.
body, outside the body, and do some upfront testing to see if there are potential problems. So I think the industry is moving in the correct way. FDA
Mhm.
has just published their NAMS paper. I think it came out this week, where they're trying to meet this idea that there's a place for animal testing. And I absolutely believe wholeheartedly that animal testing cannot be completely eradicated. Sometimes you just need the whole physiological system to work together the way it clinically would work to be able to understand the potential dangers and the potential therapeutic benefits.
Yeah.
However, there's a lot of pre-work that could be done with these NAMs, with in vitro cell culture, with
Mhm.
chemical characterization programs. In conjunction with all of this data, you can ask a lot of questions and get a lot of answers to help inform you so that you can, when you are doing animal testing, you do it in the most expeditious way possible and keep to the tenet of the 3 Rs, right? You want to reduce the amount of animals that you're using.
Mhm.
You want to reduce the uh, potential impact, the cohorts that you're going to need to use of those animals. And you want those animals to give you meaningful data. You don't just want to use the animal for the sake of using the animal. And
Yeah.
that brings me to another point that you had touched upon, which is a lot of the ISO 10993 framework that we work in for medical devices. Some of those tests aren't actually specific or sensitive enough, even though they use animals. So, a great example of this is the guinea pig maximization test that we have to run for sensitization. It is a good assay. It doesn't pick up respiratory irritants.
Mm.
So there have been products I've worked on where in the chemistry, I can see compounds coming out that are irritants and they're known to be respiratory tract irritants, but that then those same chemistries that then get extracted in a GPMT test
Mhm.
don't end up correlating or resulting in a positive sensitization assay. So I think there are some gaps right now because there are certain things that just aren't sensitive enough that maybe if we used NAMs, we used in vitro, we would be able to better predict what's happening.
It's interesting. So obviously, when those methods are used well, they not only compare to traditional models, but potentially maybe even a better tool. Is that kind of like what we're seeing, at least in some pockets of the process?
I think that's absolutely accurate,
Okay.
especially with the updates to ISO 10993-20-10 and
Mhm.
-23, where we can use some in vitro cell culture models and kind of use different physiological modeling systems to help us predict whether or not an irritation or sensitization reaction could potentially occur. Those have had really high success rates with being able to compare to some of the animal models and what
Mhm.
occurred in an animal model. And I think the future is absolutely using NAMs in conjunction downstream to inform you when you do animal testing, what kind of testing should be performed. And that thereby kind of eliminates a lot of that upfront cost, time, and effort using animals. And I think definitely
Yeah.
Europe is moving in that direction. And I think the US is trying to catch up.
Of that, I actually just recently came across an article that piqued my interest. There's a lot of movement right now integrating AI directly into the scientific workflows, right? Not just like the documented experience experiments, but helping design them, analyze data, generate hypotheses, maybe run some of those. Virtually, those hypotheses virtually based on the amount of data that you have. So if we zoom out a little bit, as we start digitizing the wet lab, right? Like the early discovery phase and make it a little bit faster, a little bit more predictive and kind of like less reliant on traditional trial and error. Do you think that eventually those are the changes that we do on the back end to really prove safety, or are those two worlds really, discovery and safety, are always going to be a little bit out of sync? Like where do you see that?
I think this is such an interesting topic because I think that AI is in everyone's face all day, every day lately.
Yes, or what we call AI, which could be a variety of different things for sure. Yeah.
I think there's always a it's going to be there's I think AI is a great tool. It's a great
Mhm.
collator. It's a great tool to give you a massive intelligent search, and you can potentially use it to run out ideas and hypotheses. I think that it is going to always be just that, a tool, an input
Yeah.
into a human making a final decision based on their experience, based on their knowledge, based on what they have done in the past. But I
Mm.
think that there is going to be a place for AI in regulatory safety, almost as like a partner to the person.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe it's going to help us build some safety confidence in the beginning stages of the process, maybe even throughout some steps of the process. But finally, like the final burden of proof, right, like is going to still rest with us at the end of the process, having taken a look at everything that has come before, right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yes.
Okay. I feel safer that way, where a human is still making an informed decision. Okay, so um, I feel like maybe there's a little bit of a system tension here, right? So on one hand, regulators are supposed to be overly, well, not overly, but cautious. That's your job,
Sure.
right? So when we're
Sure.
talking about FDA approvals, that's their job to put every single product, device, drug through the biggest scrutiny. On the other hand, if newer methods are a little bit more precise, right, and more human relevant, it raises a fair question. Why is adoption of it still so slow? Because obviously, when we see some of those innovations in maybe in tech, right, or in other areas, they're adopted from the regulatory standpoint a little bit faster. But biotech is such a behemoth, and so is FDA and all the other regulatory bodies. So, do you see that there's maybe just a little bit of that almost intentional rift to not speed up as much as maybe they could, or am I completely seeing it from a different perspective?
No, I think that of course as regulators, they need to take time to implement anything new. And we know that change takes time. I would say that in the last 2 years, I have seen both sides of the coin. I have seen FDA
Mhm.
regulators that have been incredibly wonderful to work with, where you're proposing some alternative methodologies, you're talking about the science, and they are definitely willing to work with you on it. And like any agency, right? I've also been on the receiving end of FDA where they, even though they have published that they want to see new alternative methodologies and that they accept something, they don't accept it. So I
Yeah.
think that there's just this fine balance still of, even though to us it doesn't feel new because we have been using it for the last 5 years, to the agencies, it's still new. And they're still weighing, what is that? What is the potential risk of allowing this in? Is it not capturing everything? Is there still something that's going to perform potentially problematically that just wasn't scoped out because a new methodology was used? So I think it's still a tightrope. I think
Yeah.
FDA is moving in the right direction. And like everything, I think it just takes time, it takes patience. It does not help that the turnover rate right now in a lot of governmental bodies is very high, and you have some regulators that don't have the experience yet, so it just takes them some time to go through submissions and really get a feel for what the industry is doing.
And I really like how you use the word balance. It sounds like we're trying to balance something that's like scientifically sufficient with what's regulatorily expected. And nobody really wants to make the first move to completely move
Yeah,
away from like the old system, right? Because it's
right.
hard, you know. There's some risk involved there. So yeah, well, I'm gonna stop putting you on the spot when it comes to FDA. So we're going to shift topics a little bit, or focus. One of the things, and really one of the goals of this podcast and this series, is to really talk about kind of like women in science and focus on the women part of it, not just, to think only about the science. So it's about, when we think of science in general, it is really more than just the product or the discovery, right? It's about voice, it's about judgment, and really it also about who gets heard in the rooms where the decisions are made. And I think this is a very important aspect, and a very just important topic to touch on. So it's still a very male dominated space in a lot of ways, right? But when it comes to being there in those rooms where the decisions are made, what are you seeing? Are you seeing women's voices advancing in the last few years? Are you seeing that there's more of you in the rooms where those decisions are being made? And like, how do you feel about any of that? Does it have any relevance whatsoever?
Yeah, this is again a really great topic. So I would say that I'd love to be able to say, well, it's 2026, and we all know that accomplished women hold higher technical uh, positions and are being listened to
Mhm.
equally.
More women are going into STEM too, so it's
And
proportionally.
yes, I would say that in my experience, there is still a lot of resistance to women with technical expertise talking about decisions that affect the bottom line. There's
Mm.
still resistance in that space. I would say it's still very male dominated, and it can be difficult to have your voice heard as a woman because of preconceived notions that women have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah,
I
so
think
something
there's
like, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
No, I mean, it just sounds like I was nodding my head because throughout our professional lives, I'm sure that we both had experiences where our input wasn't always heard right away. Like we almost had to reinforce what we were saying when
Yes.
maybe a colleague's input could have been just a one sentence and it would have been heard with and that value assigned to it based on his expertise. So in roles such as yours, where you're sometimes the person saying, this isn't ready, it's going to take more money to fix what is not going right. Do you think there is a little bit of a gender bias? Like, do you feel like that is still happening in a space where we almost are perceived as more cautious as such as, like we're the worry words, this is going to be fine. Like do you see that there's a difference along the gender line in there?
I would say in my experience, yes. I think
Okay.
that and I think a lot of women can relate to this. I think that we change our message depending on who we're talking to. So
Mhm.
it has been my experience that women who are in positions where they can affect the direction of a company, I can go in and have a conversation, and I don't necessarily have to worry about how I'm going to position something. I can just come out and say, all right, I think my recommendation for this would be X, and it's going to cost this amount, and it's going to add this much time, but it's in the
Mhm.
interest patient safety. And I also know conversely, depending on my audience, if I go into that same room with several colleagues, people who are going to be men, I have to change how I'm going to say it so that I'm not perceived as aggressive, so that I'm not
Yeah.
perceived as leading with emotion, and so that I'm not being perceived as almost like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, even when I'm trying to be
Don't
like,
look up. Yeah.
yeah, like I have to sit here with a board full, a room full of executives and say, hey, your device failed this really important genotoxicity assay. So we're going to have to do something about it. Trying to deliver that message to a room full of men is going to be a different strategy than a room full of women.
Yeah, and I do think it is kind of like that balance, passion, but it is a matter of perception because I think a lot of times when a man is forceful, he is deemed decisive. When a woman is
Yeah.
forceful in just the same passionate, enigmatic, animated way, she's perceived to be difficult or emotional, which is really strange to me because we're both speaking from the place of passion, expertise, conviction, right? But for some reason, again, and maybe as our gender roles, societal roles, and perception changes, this is going to be something that's smoothed out for your boys and for my daughter eventually in the
Yeah.
future. And that's the hope. But I do feel that sometimes women, especially in those decision making rooms, almost are forced to present themselves in a more measured way on purpose in order to be perceived, I guess, more seriously. And that's just not an easy adjustment sometimes because I'm a talker. I'm passionate about what I love. I speak with passion and conviction about certain things. And I know how I come across. I come across as somebody who is genuinely interested in the subject matter. So I think sometimes it's just the perception of it is going to vary.
I completely agree, Marina. And I think that there's been a lot of advancement in the space in general. I would
Mhm.
say that throughout my tenure in this career path, I've seen a lot of positive change and a lot of explicit asking of input from people that are like myself, that are like at a senior technical level and do have to weigh in on specific business decisions. But I still think there's a lot of work we can do. And I think that I would say not I don't want to point out any specific age groups, but I will say working with people that are of a specific age can be challenging if they're older and they grew up where, when women weren't even allowed to have their own credit card, right? In the '70s, they
Yeah.
had to have their husband sign for it. So, if you're working with somebody that comes from that world, it can be difficult, I think, sometimes. But I will say that younger colleagues tend to get it, and you don't have to preface everything so much.
That's actually the perfect segue into my next question, because one of the things I'm finding is that when you go to school, regardless of your industry, regardless of your focus in terms of the scientific pursuits or what you're going to be working in, women in general are really not taught to communicate in a way that will help them deliver the message in advance. We're not taught to correct for something that has been a societal bias. Absolutely imperative, in my opinion, to have those mentors, to have mentors like you, what you mentioned, somebody who can sit you down and tell you how it is, even if it's not something that you like to hear, want to hear, something that you may need to make an adjustment for just in order to get yourself heard. And so I always appreciate when women mentor other women, when women want to step up and share that. You've mentioned you had an excellent mentor. So do you feel that actively seeking a mentor as well as actively offering mentorship is really something that we need to showcase and elevate and talk about more in science, in your field, or in any other field? Come talk to me a little bit about that.
Absolutely, Marina. So I think it is paramount to success to be able
Mhm.
to find somebody that can mentor you and that you can have real discussions with,
Yeah.
and that you value their input. So definitely just growing up, my mom was a huge inspiration. She was one of four daughters, and she was the only one that went to college and got her nursing degree, and forged her own path.
Yeah.
And having my mom, having my PhD thesis advisor, seeing how these women interact with their families, their friends in a professional way, and being able to really just sit down and talk to them about real world issues. Like,
Hmm.
I have a deadline tomorrow that I have to meet, but I also have my 3-year-old throwing up. What do I do? How do I still come across as professional and dedicated to the job while having my 9-year-old screaming in the background because he's fighting with his brother? There's so
Yeah.
many things that I think situationally come up where you have to find somebody that you can talk to about that you
Yeah.
trust, that has been through it, that can navigate it for you, that can give you honest feedback. Even if you maybe don't always want to hear that feedback, I think it's really important to find somebody that you can emulate and that you can trust.
I think we need to normalize those conversations too. I think that's one of the things we're not doing. We kind of either tend to judge women too harshly. Oh, she just wants it all, right? She wants a professional career and this. And genuinely, I do feel it's the language that we have been using that we need to edit, even when women are speaking about other women. Because honestly, mentorship needs to be done well, right? Like, and one of the aspects of mentorship is to give a safe space to have a conversation without judgment, to be able to learn from somebody else's experience and kind of
Yes.
edit whatever it is that you need your future to be based on other people's experience. So what do you feel was done really well for you in terms of having that mentor? Like, what makes a mentorship truly good?
So I would say one of the most important things that I was told very early on in my career from both my mom and my thesis advisor. And this is maybe going to be a little controversial, but the idea that you can have it all, that you can be 100% mom, 100% wife, 100% partner, 100% at work is just crap. You can't. It's just You can't.
Okay.
Lean
Something
in.
will dip.
Yeah, lean in made her a lot of money and good for her that she's trying to empower women, but no, it doesn't work like that. Some days you are going to be amazing at your job. You are going to
Mhm.
be the top. You are going to have a handle on everything. You're going to be able to get all of your analyses out, take 3 meetings, make the decisions, get product released into China, and it's going to be great, and you're going to go home, and then you're going to be able to hang out with your family. When you're 100% at your job, you're not going to be 100% mom or 100% wife, and that's just the facts of it.
Yeah.
You cannot be stretched in all of those directions and then be expected to perform perfectly in all of them. And unfortunately, I think that our society sometimes lets women believe that's an option, that they can do everything 100%, and I think that that is the biggest lie.
I think you're absolutely right. Like I'm a girl mom. My kiddo is 10. I'm also her Girl Scout troop leader. And one of the things that I always emphasize to her as well as to the girls in the troop is that it's important to speak up, but it's also important to know to assess how you're feeling. Like
Yes.
where are you in terms of what it is that you're doing? So I absolutely hear you. I think we need to normalize conversations about there's only so much of us, there's a
Yes.
finite number of hours in the day, and whether you want to or not, it will be a balancing act. If that is your equation for happiness, as long as you don't assign so much guilt to when one side of it dips a little because the other one has to rise up in terms of effort and time, I think those are the kinds of conversations we need to have instead of telling our girls to always be at 100 in
Yes.
everything because it's unattainable, it's unrealistic. And this is where they start feeling like failures because they're not 100% in all things in life and somehow put those crazy expectations on themselves, which are just simply just not the reality of how life is. Because as I said, unless we can clone ourselves or use Hermione's, turn back medallion, we cannot function that way. Okay, so I really want to give, I love that as part of the advice that I wanted to ask you for. If you would talk to a young woman who is smart, ambitious, passionate about whatever field of science, or maybe toxicology or biocompatibility specifically, maybe a little intense, and she's wondering what she has to do to either tone herself down or what would make her most successful? What would be just a couple of pieces of advice that you would give her right now based on your experience in this market?
I love that question, Marina. What I would say is I think one of the most important things is don't worry about being liked. Don't worry about if everybody likes you. You stay true to your convictions. You stay true
Mhm.
to your code of ethics, your morals. You do right by the people that you work with and the people that you serve, especially if it's in an industry like mine, where at the end of the day, patient safety is first and foremost, right? I
Mhm.
don't care if you like me when I'm talking to you about what you need to do with the device that I'm looking at. I care that you're going to make sure that you follow a plan that makes it safe. And I would
I
say,
love that.
don't worry about that. I think sometimes as women and girls from an early age, we're conditioned to be likable and to have all of these friends and to say the right thing and to be socially appropriate. I would say, don't worry about that. All of that will come into place. The right people who value you for your morals, for your education, for your experience, they're going to stick through and stick by you, like, no matter what.
Yeah. And I think I absolutely love that. But I also think that in addition to that, we really need to help young women entering the workforce, whatever that may be, understand that that likability does not have to translate into the workplace. And I don't mean that you have to be at conflict with all your coworkers, that you can't have water
Right.
cooler moments, or that you shouldn't be an integral part of building out a company culture, because we spend a lot of time with our coworkers, right? We
Yeah.
definitely need to be able to establish those relationships. But I think it should never be at the expense of our convictions. And I think this is where that, do I want to be liked, or do I really need to do my job, say what I need to say, because that is my conviction, that is my truth? I think that is the conversation that we need to have and reinforce with the girls from the very early age so they feel true to themselves without having to compromise some of the things that they know in order to be liked.
100%. It's so important to to stay true to your convictions. And
Mhm.
everything, it's been my experience, even in the most difficult situations that I've encountered in my life professionally, in even personally, if you stay true to who you are and your convictions, it will work out. It always works out. And you're always on the better end of everything. And you have the people that matter by your side.
Yeah. You almost got ahead of me because one of the things that I always like to end conversations on is just something optimistic. What gives you hope? What are you seeing as some of those positive changes? What are some of the concrete steps that you or I or anybody listening to us can do to facilitate those changes maybe happening a little bit better or a little bit faster? Like, give me some positive future outlook and maybe what we can do to contribute to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Marina. I think having these conversations early, if you are working with youth, talking to them, making
Mhm.
sure it's a safe space, coming out and saying, what it's like, what your experiences are, what it's like to do your job and tough situations you've faced and how you've dealt with them. I think being honest about some of the trials and tribulations that you can face and just having an open dialogue and being approachable about things,
Mhm.
getting involved early, talking to the younger generations, and then bringing up uncomfortable topics sometimes and
Yeah.
having confidence to bring up uncomfortable topics and follow through with them. And you don't need to get upset and you don't need to get aggressive, but you can still be passionate about what you're talking about and still be heard.
Yeah. Now, for anybody listening out there, if you're a young professional, find yourself a mentor, reach out to people, become a mentor for somebody who is even younger, who's entering that space. Try to have those conversations with people that really need them. And if you are the one who needs that conversation to happen and there's nobody out there to listen, you can always reach out to us. You can always reach out to Laura. You can always also post your experience because chances are somebody's going to notice, even if one person kind of feels seen by seeing the experience that's similar to what you have been through. That certainly helps. Is there anything else that you would like to add in closing? Basically, just something maybe we forgot to mention or something else that you would like to talk about at the end?
I think this has been wonderful, Marina. I think that being able to give a voice and a platform to uplift women and to share experiences and just be able to say, I am passionate about what I do. And here are some issues that I face too. And how
Yeah.
did you deal with these? Just having that openness, that ability. I love the idea that you just said about posting it because chances are somebody else has experienced that exact same thing. I think that's all great advice. And, I'm excited to be part of all the good that's happening in biotech and being able to be one of the leaders and represent that. Yes, I am a woman here. We have unique insight and unique perspectives sometimes because we do literally think differently than men. Sometimes we have different insights, and that can lead to a lot of really positive change.
Absolutely. Incredible, Laura. Honestly, this has been one of my favorite conversations. I so appreciate you taking your time. To our audience, thank you for listening. Hopefully, you learned something. I certainly did. If you'd like to connect with Laura, we will put a link to her LinkedIn profile in the show notes so you can always connect, say hello. And then, obviously, thank you. And we'll see you next time on the Talent Lab. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Marina. Bye bye.